Hi everybody, welcome to this episode of Enlightenment Today. I'm Jason. Today we'll speak about the Taoist sage Zhuangzi. Now Zhuangzi is the second most popular Taoist sage throughout history, first probably being Lao-tzu. Zhuangzi existed from 369 to 286 BCE towards the end of the Warring States period of China. So after when it is thought that Lao-tzu existed and also Confucius. Now, Zhuangzian philosophy is thought of in the East as an elite spirituality. It is still adaptable to the modern day, and it's relevant to us in the modern world. People living in society, even people living in the countryside, doesn't matter where. The Zhuangzian philosophy seems to stand the test of time. Now, Zhuangzi's philosophy differs to Lao-tzu's philosophy somewhat. Lao-tzu would say for us, to be in harmony with the Tao, the way, the irreducible essence of the universe, we should leave society and go back to nature and live in nature in accord with the Tao, the way things are. Zhuangzi would say, counter to this, that we don't have to really leave society, but we can be in the world but not of it. So in saying that, Zhuangzi is saying that in society, what the problem is not society itself, it's us acting out the motives of society. So he's saying to be in accord with the way, the Tao, in harmony with nature, all we need to do is refrain from what drives society. The greed, the lust, people seeking fame and so forth and so on. We just have to refrain from those tendencies that make us into a solid identity and ego. So Zhuangzi he was probably the original proponent of in the world but not of it. Now, Zhuangzi's philosophy is still similar to Lao-tzu's because the central tenet of Taoism is wu-wei. Wu-wei means effortless action, non-force, non-doing, and Zhuangzi's philosophy is about trying to harness wu-wei. How do we get into a state of wu-wei, an effortless mind, essentially. And also part of his philosophy is de, which means someone who lives the virtue of the Tao, or we could even say charismatic power, someone who has charismatic power because they have reduced their sense of self and have come into harmony with the Tao. And also naturalness, zitran, which means someone who is an authentic man according to a Tao, someone whose personality has been diminished, has been refined to be more humble and to be the essence of the Tao, which is to be a humble man or humble woman and to live in accord with nature. And according to Zhuangzi, nature is still within cities and societies and so forth and so on. So Zhuangzi's philosophy is about how do we get into this wu-wei state. Now when we think of wu-wei, we can compare it to Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi's work in flow, a flow state of consciousness. So when we're in the zone, you see sports people or writers and musicians who are in the zone, they're in the flow. They're in the flow. Their mind has disengaged from thinking too much. They're not overthinking. They are in the process of nature. Now, Zhuangzi looked at this as the enlightened mind. He thought that this effortless state of mind is what we all are aspiring to attain, but in a more permanent state, not just in states of playing basketball or playing rugby league or American football and being in the flow. So the whole text, the Zhuangzi text, which is attributed to him, is basically a book of strategies about getting into a state of wu-wei, getting into a state of effortlessness in your mind. Now Zhuangzi is probably one of the more clever sages and one of the more humorous actually. In the Zhuangzi text, he uses a lot of humor he actually highlights a lot of the ugly side of life to articulate wu-wei. So Zhuangzi, he commends the hunchback who is trying to catch cicadas. He commends the butcher, the wood carver, the drunk, and also the useless tree, which no one can make anything out of because the branches and that are all twisting here and there. So it's not like a straight and rigid tree that we can make use of. So he applauds these people, he applauds the ugliness of life, and he uses these people like the hunchback and the butcher and so forth and so on to highlight states of wu-wei. Now, one of the great stories is a story of Butcher Ding, or Cook Ding, we could say. And he uses this to articulate the skill of a craftsman and also about how we should live in our life. He uses the story of Butcher Ding. Now, Butcher Ding is cutting up an ox for Lord Wen-wei, one of the emperors of the time. And Lord Wen-wei is observing Butcher Ding, and Butcher Ding with his cleaver, his blade, is gracefully gliding through an ox, and the ox is just falling apart effortlessly. It's just coming apart effortlessly. And Lord Wen-wei inquires into what Butcher Ding or Cook Ding is doing. He says, how do you achieve these feats? How do you do all this? And Butcher Ding says, when I first started cutting up ox, all I could see was the ox. And then after 3 years, I began to see with spirit. I began to see with my chi. I began to see more than the ox. And his emphasis was more on, all he cared about was the way, the Tao. He didn't care really about cutting up ox. He looked at it as an opportunity to be in harmony with the Tao. Now, so Butcher Ding, he would glide through the ox, and he would not meet resistance with ligaments or bones and so forth and so on. So this is kind of a metaphor for how we effectively move in the world, what he's teaching Lord Wen-wei here. He's teaching us that we need to be open when we are in the world and to move through it skillfully. You could even say that the bones and the ligaments are the obstacles that we inevitably come across, and the blade is us. So Butcher Ding, he emphasizes to Lord Wen-wei that he has not had to sharpen his cleaver in 19 years of using it. So that means he's kept his blade sharp, meaning he's kept himself sharp, and he's moving through life effectively. Now, Zhuangzi is using this as the way that we should move in the world. But he's also, like I said, he's applauding the skill of the craftsman. So Butcher Ding has spent years in developing his skill as a butcher, and he's harnessed that skill, and he can move in harmony with the Tao without meeting resistance, and his life is in perfect harmony with nature. Now, this is also a metaphor to get into that state, to be effective in the world like this. Butcher Ding has had to let go of himself and his thinking, his sense of I in this process. He is in the zone, as we were talking about before. As we talk about zone states, as most people know, is when someone's in the zone, their sense of self is not really there. They don't really feel like they're there. They're in the process of nature. Now, this relates to cognitive science. And if you want to know more about cognitive science, it's best for you to look at my episode on the geography of mind, but I'll briefly go over it here. What this means is, when we look at cognitive science, there's the cold and the hot cognition. So basically, the cold cognition is in the prefrontal cortex area, in the frontal lobe of the brain, and that is the cognitive control regions. So that's usually when we think of ourselves as, when I think of myself as Jason, I'm thinking actually just with this part, the person who's doing all of these things and making calculated analytical decisions. This is who I'm thinking about. This is the cold cognition. So the one who thinks a lot, the one who thinks too much. And the hot cognition is more in the back part of the brain here, where a lot of scientists associate with the unconscious, and some people associate it with the limbic system of the brain. Now, the unconscious, the hot system is what makes me do this. I don't have to think about this. In the same way that once you learn how to write, you don't have to think about writing. You can just do it. Same with the musician who learns how to play music. Once the skill has become embodied, it becomes part of their hot cognition. Though they needed a lot of thinking and their cold system to get there, once it becomes embodied, they can play music effortlessly. This is Zhuangzi's point. So the skill becomes embodied, and this is a metaphor for how we should live our life. What neuroscientists use the word down-regulate. So we should down-regulate the sense of self, or I, in the prefrontal cortex to get into this flow state, into this wu-wei state of consciousness, this state of effortlessness, this state of no force and non-doing. Now, Zhuangzi, because he has a million stories that articulate this a lot, he uses the story of a drunk. So the drunk is on a cart, and the drunk is coming home. It's a drunken man coming home. And the cart is going very fast. The old carriage is going very fast. And the drunk falls out of the carriage at the high speed, and he just gets up and he's not injured. Now, the meaning of this story, there's a few meanings, but first of all, because he's drunk, he's completely loose. He's completely open. He's not stiff. He's not rigid. Zhuangzi is not emphasizing alcohol here. He's cleverly using a story that the drunk is loose. There is the scientific aspect of it is when we drink alcohol, for example, we do down-regulate the prefrontal cortex, and we become very loose and more in nature until we start drinking too much, and then we go overboard. But when we have a few, we get into this effortless state where we can embrace anything. We are very open. It's unfortunate some people need alcohol to do that, but he uses the drunk in that sense, because the drunk falls off the cart. He's not hurt. He gets up, walks away as if nothing happened. You know, who knows? He may have had a hangover the next day. He may have been a bit sore. But the moral of the story is that because he wasn't stiff and rigid, he effectively was not hurt. Now, the deeper metaphor of this is to be not drunk on alcohol, but what Zhuangzi would say is to be drunk on heaven, or drunk on the Tao. So he means that a sage themselves, a sage, not him, he probably didn't refer to himself as a sage, but he's articulating that a sage is drunk on heaven, drunk on the Tao. So why he's saying that, he's saying that the things that harm most people do not harm the sage who is drunk on heaven. You know, so most people who fall out of a cart will probably get hurt, but those who are drunk on heaven can fall out of the cart and they won't be hurt. Not literally, but that's more of a metaphor. So the sage is moving through the world without anything hurting them. They're not affected by anything, because they have this effortless state of mind and they are moving through life skillfully, as Butcher Ding's blade was moving through the ligaments and the bones without meeting resistance or obstacles. Now, this is one of the key tenets of Zhuangzian philosophy, because Zhuangzi always advocated of having an impartial view of reality, not a partial view, because partial view comes from the sense of I, subjectiveness, you thinking that things are this and that, and so forth and so on. So the sage has a purely impartial view. You know, the sage is not hurt by the world, nor are they swayed by people's opinions and what we are supposed to believe. Again, the Zhuangzian point of view is refraining from what drives society. You know, because in cases that what drives society is not really beneficial to us. So his point is to have that impartial view. Now, there is a famous story in China, actually. It's the farmer and son story, to articulate this impartiality of reality, thinking about reality not in the sense of logic, but in the sense of the irrational sphere, like in Zen. Now, in this story, the farmer has a horse. Now, the horse breaks through the fence, runs away, and then it's run away and it's gone. And so the people of the village come over and they say, "Oh, geez, how unfortunate you are." And the farmer says, "You know, we'll see." The next day, 2 wild horses come back with his horse. And then so he puts them in the barn and so forth and so on. And the people from the village come around and they say, "Geez, how fortunate you are." And he's like, "We'll see." The next day, his son jumps on one of the wild horses and the horse is going crazy, and then the son falls off and breaks his leg. The village people come around, "Geez, how unfortunate you are." And he's like, "We'll see." The next day, conscription officers come around to each of the houses in the village. And because his son is injured, he can't go to war. So the village, in the end, because all the men go, all the village women come over to see the farmer and they say, "How fortunate you are." And he's like, "We'll see." And then as time went on, his son developed a limp from this broken leg. So all the village women come over to the farmer, how unfortunate, you know, you are. And he's like, "We'll see." So then in the end, all of the men who went to war, they all died. So the only 2 men left was the farmer and his son. And so they could keep doing a lot of the heavy labor, they could keep farming for the rest of the community. And then the women come over to see the farmer, and how fortunate we all are that you're still here. And you know what he said? "We'll see." So you see here, there's no logical end to the story. This is the point of this story. It's like a Zen koan. There's no logical end to it. If you see it in partiality, you think, "Oh, geez, how bad it is. His son broke his leg," and so forth and so on. But as you see life move on, it's not quite like that. Things change, they mold. Sometimes what we think is a bad situation turns into a good situation. We often know this through self-reflection when we look at our lives. When bad things have happened, they've led to good things. Zhuangzi's point is to keep the impartial view, because that's the nature of reality. You know, good things are not really good things. They're only good or bad things from our subjective viewpoint. And often good things lead to bad things, or bad things lead to good things, you know, vice versa. And it goes on like this, you know, forever. So there is no partial perspective. This is his point. There is no partial perspective of life when we really see it. Nature itself is not partial. Nature is impartial. This is what he's saying. You know, what's the subjective opinion of a tree? You know, a tree is just a tree. So what he's saying is, you know, our rational attempts to try and define reality and logic is only coming from our cold cognitive state. It's only coming from our sense of I trying to dissect reality and to give it meaning to our subjective state. You know, but what is the meaning of a tree? What is the meaning of a flower? You know, there is no meaning. The tree and a flower, they are just the way they are. Zhuangzi, because he highlighted a lot of the ugly aspects of life, and he applauded the skilled craftsman and so forth and so on, he often condemned those who tried to induce a skilled state or a craftsman-like state, because he believed that it wasn't like nature. In some cases, he even poked fun at the artist or the philosopher and so forth and so on for trying to induce a hot cognitive state, because when you're trying to induce a state of consciousness like that, you will inevitably fail. It has to become natural. It has to really become part of your hot cognition. Unless, if it doesn't, then you're just thinking about it. You're still using your hot cognition. You are trying too hard to achieve that skill. You know, this is the paradox of wu-wei, of trying not to try. How do I get to that stage where I'm not trying to try, where it's just effortless, where it's just coming out of me spontaneously? And this is the point of zitran, naturalness, spontaneity of itself. How do I be like that in my life? How do I achieve those results? So the ultimate method of achieving this wu-wei state, this naturalness, this skill of the craftsman, is in one of the passages in the Zhuangzi text. Now, it's a story between Yen Wei and Confucius. Zhuangzi is playing the mouthpiece of Confucius here. Usually Zhuangzi would probably not talk favorably of Confucius, but he uses Confucius here as the sage-like figure because he was one of the more popular sages of that time in the Warring States period of China. And Yen Wei is Confucius's disciple in the story. Now, in the story, Yen Wei is he has all these elaborate plans to change the temperament and the personality and the character of a ruler in Wei, in another province, in another area, another state I should say, in ancient China, where the ruler there has become, you know, very arrogant, and he abuses the people and so forth and so on. So Yen Wei has all of these elaborate strategies about making him benevolent, teaching him about virtue and so forth and so on. And Confucius, as Zhuangzi as Confucius, he just knocks all of these strategies away. No, not this, not this, not this. And in the end, Confucius says to Yen Wei, you need to fast. And Yen Wei says, I fast all the time. You know, I don't drink wine, I don't drink a lot of meat and so forth and so on. I fast regularly. And he's like, no, that's the fasting of the body. What you need is the fasting of the mind. Okay? So a lot of people don't know what fasting of the mind is. Now, fasting of the mind is an ancient practice, actually, in Asia. And we can take it back to the Upanishadic era in the Vedic civilization, where you find in Sanskrit, you find neti, which means not this, or not this, not that. Now, a lot of people think that that's to do with the body, not this, but this is not true. Neti means not this, not this. The monkey mind, which is thinking about things constantly, so forth and so on. You begin to develop the faculty, the pure awareness to see your mind objectively and to see the monkey mind bouncing around. You should do this and so forth and so on. It's, you know, it's basically just talking to itself. So in the Vedic civilization, they developed the idea of viveka. Viveka is a Sanskrit word for discrimination, for being able to discern within your mind what's real and what's not. Basically, the monkey mind is always jumping around. So when you develop this faculty, this neti ability to say not this, not this, you're beginning to fast the mind. If you practice this sincerely for a long time, this actually became the Advaita Vedanta tradition in India, which you still see in India, and you see sages such as Ramana Maharishi, who had practiced this self-inquiry his whole life, not this, not this. And you also see this in Buddhism, this fasting the mind aspect, this practice, and it goes way back, and we see it in the Vipassana tradition, and in modern day we see the Vipassana courses that are around the world, which is a course of 10 days, no speaking and only light vegetarian meals, I think twice a day. And it's a lot of meditation. So basically what you're doing is you're completely fasting the mind. You're not giving it any stimulation, and you're coming right back down into the center of your own being. So fasting the mind itself, the practice, is about refraining from external distractions and coming back within inside yourself. And this has an effect. It's similar to when we fast the body, because when we fast the body for a few days, you feel fatigued, you feel like you're desperate for food. Likewise with the mind harvests food through here and through here. So when you take the stimulation away from the eyes and the ears, your mind starts to, there's a friction there, but once you get through this, it's a tranquil peace. Once you begin to fast the mind, people do discover this when they go to a Vipassana 10-day course. Now, there's a scientific aspect to fasting the mind, and this comes from the ancient Eastern science of the nervous system, about how we see the nervous system, which is still advocated in Zen Buddhism and other aspects of Buddhism. And the effect that fasting the mind has on our nervous system, according to the East, is we get out of what we call the sympathetic nervous system, which is the sympathetic nervous system is the part of our nervous system that is always in action. It's always in motion. Even when it's in here, when you're thinking a lot, this is still a sympathetic nervous system. When you think you're relaxing, watching TV or a program, you are still accessing the sympathetic nervous system. You are still activating that because you are still stimulating yourself. You are still stimulating your nervous system. This is related to the fight or flight aspect of ourselves. Now, the other part of the nervous system that we hardly ever nourish is called the parasympathetic nervous system, which is identified with rest and digest. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system is accessed in complete rest. It's accessed in when we meditate and we close ourselves off from the world. It's accessed when we're not stimulating ourselves in any bit, not through the eyes, the ears, and not shoveling stuff within our mouth. Now the problem in our world is we're not accessing the parasympathetic nervous system. We are only stimulating the sympathetic nervous system. Now, according to the East, if we're only doing this is contributing to mental health issues. It's contributing to a society gone mad. Now, if you haven't looked outside, there's a lot of mental health issues going on. Depression is high, suicides are high. People have just a pure dissatisfaction for life. It's because that they've overstimulated their whole organism, their whole sense of being. And this contributes to depression, it contributes to us being disconnected from each other, and so forth and so on. So these two, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic, are part of what is called the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system largely acts unconscious and regulates our bodily functions. So our heart rate, our respiratory rate, our digestion, our pupillary response, urination, sexual arousal, so forth and so on. So that's the autonomic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic are part of that aspect of ourself. So especially in Zen Buddhism and in the ancient East, Zen Buddhism now and in the ancient East, they advocate us to completely fast our mind, even in Vipassana, and begin to access this parasympathetic nervous system more. Because we are not accessing it, we are living anxious, stressful lives. This is why we need to live a life that is, in some sense, a little bit disciplined and structured, especially if you're talking about stillness meditation. Everyone should incorporate stillness meditation into daily life for at least 20 minutes, because you're giving yourself the chance to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. I know a lot of people who are Tai Chi practitioners and yoga practitioners and so forth and so on, they think that they're activating it through their practice, but it's not as strong as if you just sit there and you just observe the monkey mind and you let your body completely shut down and completely fast. Now, fasting the mind, I'm not saying we should fast the mind all the time. It should be periodic. It should be, sometimes it's good to go away to a Vipassana retreat and completely fast, but I advocate people to incorporate stillness meditation in their daily life to access this parasympathetic nervous system. Now, why this is important, why Zhuangzi advocated this, is in relation especially to what we've been talking about in the nervous system, is the parasympathetic nervous system actually affects the enteric nervous system, which is a mesh-like network of neurons governing the function of our gastrointestinal system. So basically the parasympathetic nervous system, when we begin to relax, we affect the enteric nervous system, which actually controls our gut responses, our responses to the natural world and the natural signals that come to us intuitively. So what we are doing is we are attuning to the spontaneous signals coming from our gut instincts. And this is why it's important to the Zhuangzi, because Zhuangzi is saying that when we begin to fast, when we begin to access the parasympathetic nervous system, we begin to act as Butcherding did from his gut and perfectly move in harmony with the Tao, in harmony with the Wei. We are in tune with this and not this. We are in tune with nature and not the rational aspect in the prefrontal cortex. We are moving in harmony with nature. That's the point of Zhuangzian philosophy, is to get back into that craftsman-like awareness, that skill, and begin to live it. Not just in your skill. Like obviously if you learn a skill, it's great. Like if you learn to play music, or you're a great Tai Chi practitioner, this is wonderful. But the point is to take that out into life itself. This is Zhuangzi's point. It's to be, what I say is Zen in life. It's to be that blade moving through every aspect of life. And when you do move like that, you have this sense, this deep sense of humility that people feel. It's the power of the Tao coming to life in the world. This is what Zhuangzi's philosophy is about. It's about getting into that state and being that sharp blade, moving through and affecting the world from your humble place. Okay. Now, if you want to know more about Zhuangzian philosophy, there's a lot of great books to get into. Many, many, many great books to get into. Obviously, you should pick yourself up a version of the Zhuangzi text. Now, this is the complete works of Zhuangzi, translated by Burton Watson, one of my favorite books. I recommend this one, personally, because it's the complete version of the Zhuangzi. It's not just the inner chapters, which a lot of people take out of the whole text. He's got everything here, and it's a great book, full of humor, full of enlightenment. You'll love it. Now, another book I recommend is The Way of Zhuangzi by Trappist monk Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton was a brilliant man, and this is a brilliant book. It's basically, he's retranslating the Zhuangzi text, mainly the inner chapters, and he's putting his own intuition into it, and it's a beautiful book. You could sit there and read and be in deep contemplation all day. It's a beautiful book. Now, another book I recommend is Trying Not to Try by scholar Edward Slinglin. This is a great book. Edward Slinglin's a very intelligent man, and he has a lot of knowledge on Chinese philosophy, and he's a great lover of Zhuangzian philosophy. But Trying Not to Try gets down into the paradox of wu-wei, and he does use a lot of Zhuangzi's strategies here to articulate how we get down into that state of wu-wei. Okay. Now, another classic and one of my favorite books is by Alan Watts. It's Tao, the Watercourse Way. It's a brilliant book. Not that it just focuses on Zhuangzi, but it focuses on the state of wu-wei, how to be naturally in that state without trying to induce it, how do we have the skill of Buchading without trying to induce it, letting it naturally happen. How does that happen? This is the point. And so these books I highly recommend. And there's a lot on Zhuangzi. There's a lot of books on Zhuangzi, but the Zhuangzi philosophy, I believe, is one of the great philosophies of the world. It's the great philosophy of martial arts. Most martial artists don't know that they are following Zhuangzian philosophy about harnessing skill. And it's the philosophy of any artist. It's the philosophy of becoming the craftsman and living your life skillfully, but learning from your craft to become humble and be skillful in all aspects of life. That's the heart of Zhuangzi. So I hope you enjoyed this episode of Enlightenment Today. I enjoyed speaking to you about it, and I'll see you again next time.